If civilization had to start over tomorrow, on a planet that is not this one, how many people would you actually need to make it work? Not survive for a few years. Not limp along until supplies run out. Actually work, generation after generation, with a gene pool healthy enough to avoid collapse and a set of skills broad enough to keep a colony alive without a resupply ship from Earth ever showing up again. The answer is not obvious, and it is not what most science fiction has trained you to expect. It is not 2 people and a spaceship. It is not 100 astronauts with PhDs. The real number, when you actually run the genetics, the resource math, and the skill requirements, is far stranger and far more specific than anything you have seen in a movie. And today, we are going to calculate it properly, piece by piece, until we land on a number that real scientists have already spent decades trying to answer. Let's start with the piece of this puzzle that almost nobody thinks about first, but that every serious study on this topic begins with: genetics. Human beings are not machines that just need fuel and oxygen to keep running. We are biological organisms with DNA, and DNA carries with it a hidden vulnerability that becomes catastrophically important the moment you shrink a population down small enough. That vulnerability is called inbreeding depression, and it happens when a population becomes so small that individuals are forced to reproduce with genetically similar partners, whether they are technically related or not, simply because the pool of available partners has shrunk too far. When this happens across multiple generations, harmful recessive genetic mutations that would normally stay hidden and rare start pairing up and expressing themselves far more often, leading to increased rates of genetic disease, reduced fertility, and weaker immune function passed down through the population. This is not theoretical. We see it in isolated human populations throughout history, and we see it dramatically in conservation biology, where small founding populations of endangered animals often struggle with exactly this problem for generations, even after their numbers begin to recover. So what number of founding humans actually avoids this trap? Researchers who study minimum viable population size, a concept originally developed in conservation biology to determine how many individuals of an endangered species are needed to avoid extinction through genetic decline, have applied similar mathematical models to human space colonization scenarios. The most commonly cited range that comes out of these calculations sits somewhere between 110 and 40,000 people. And yes, that range is genuinely that wide, because the answer depends heavily on assumptions about reproduction rates, generational overlap, and how carefully partner pairing is managed to maximize genetic diversity. A frequently cited study from 2002 by anthropologist John Moore modeled generation ship scenarios and suggested that a starting population of around 160 people, with careful management of reproduction to avoid close genetic pairing, could maintain adequate genetic diversity over multiple generations. More recent and more conservative models, particularly ones that account for random genetic drift and the accumulation of harmful mutations over many generations without any possibility of introducing new genetic material from outside the colony, push that number significantly higher, with some researchers arguing for founding populations closer to several thousand to comfortably avoid genetic decline over centuries rather than just decades. But genetics alone does not build a functioning civilization. This is where most popular explanations of this topic stop, and it is exactly where the real complexity begins. A colony needs to actually produce food, generate power, treat illness and injury, manufacture and repair equipment, educate children, and maintain social and psychological stability, all without a supply chain stretching back to Earth. Let's break this down by function, because the skill requirements alone dramatically reshape what an ideal founding population actually looks like. You need agricultural specialists who understand closed-loop food production, because growing food on another planet, whether through hydroponics, aeroponics, or eventually adapted soil agriculture, is nothing like farming on Earth and requires managing artificial light cycles, nutrient delivery, and pest control in a completely sealed environment. You need medical professionals covering general practice, emergency trauma care, dentistry, and critically, obstetrics, because a colony intending to reproduce across generations needs people capable of safely managing pregnancy and childbirth without a hospital to transfer complicated cases to. You need engineers across multiple specialties, including structural engineers to maintain habitats capable of withstanding whatever atmospheric or radiation conditions the target planet presents, electrical and power systems engineers to keep energy generation running without failure, and life support engineers specifically trained in the closed-loop air and water recycling systems that quite literally keep everyone breathing. You also need people whose skills are easy to overlook in a purely technical calculation, but that become essential the moment you are talking about generations rather than years. Teachers, to educate children born on the colony who have never seen Earth and need to learn not just practical survival skills, but the accumulated scientific and cultural knowledge of human civilization. Psychologists and conflict mediators, because isolated populations under sustained stress, in a genuinely unfamiliar and confined environment, are at real risk of interpersonal conflict. And history shows us repeatedly that social breakdown, not equipment failure, is often what actually destroys long-term isolated missions. And you need generalists, people with broad, flexible skill sets capable of filling gaps when specialists are unavailable, sick, injured, or simply overwhelmed. Because in a small colony, there is no backup workforce waiting in reserve. When researchers combine the genetic minimum with the practical skill requirements needed to sustain a functioning, self-sufficient society, the numbers that come out of serious academic modeling tend to cluster in a genuinely fascinating range. Several studies focused specifically on generationship and long-term space colonization scenarios have suggested that somewhere between 10,000 and 40,000 people represents a more robust and sustainable target, comfortably covering both genetic diversity across many future generations and the sheer breadth of professional skills required to maintain a functioning, self-sufficient civilization without any resupply from Earth. Smaller numbers, in the low hundreds, might technically avoid the worst of genetic collapse if reproduction is extremely carefully managed, but they leave almost no margin for skill redundancy, meaning the loss of even a small handful of specialists to illness, accident, or simple bad luck could leave critical gaps in medical care, engineering maintenance, or food production with no one else trained to fill them. Now let's talk about resources, because population size interacts directly with what a colony actually needs to physically sustain itself. And this is where theoretical population numbers meet hard physical constraints. Every person requires a baseline of food, water, breathable air, livable space, and energy. And all of that needs to either be produced locally or transported at a cost that becomes genuinely staggering at scale. Current spaceflight economics mean that transporting large populations, along with the infrastructure needed to support them, represents one of the single largest logistical and financial challenges in this entire scenario, which is precisely why most serious mission planning today focuses on much smaller initial footholds, sending dozens to low hundreds of people first to establish basic infrastructure, test closed-loop life support systems at smaller scale, and begin local resource utilization before ever attempting to scale toward a population large enough for true long-term genetic and civilizational sustainability. In other words, the 10,000 to 40,000 number represents a long-term target for genuine self-sufficiency, not a realistic number for an initial founding mission in the coming decades. This raises a genuinely interesting tension at the heart of this entire topic. The population size needed to survive the first few years on another planet is dramatically smaller than the population size needed to remain genetically and functionally viable across many future generations without support from Earth. Early missions can lean on brought supplies, careful mission planning, and eventually resupply flights to bridge gaps in both resources and genetic diversity. True independence, the point at which a colony could theoretically restart human civilization entirely on its own with zero contact from Earth ever again, requires an order of magnitude more people than most early colonization proposals actually planned for. This is part of why serious researchers in this field increasingly frame space colonization not as a single dramatic founding event, but as a gradual, multi-generational scaling process, where population grows steadily over decades as infrastructure, food production capacity, and genetic diversity are all deliberately built up together. There is also a psychological and cultural dimension to this question that pure genetics and resource math cannot fully capture. A colony intending to preserve and continue human civilization is not just preserving bodies and DNA. It is attempting to preserve knowledge, culture, language, art, governance systems, and the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years of human experience. That requires deliberately including people across a wide range of disciplines beyond pure survival skills: historians, artists, ethicists, and educators. People whose contributions are not measured in calories produced or oxygen recycled, but in whether the resulting society is actually one worth restarting in the first place. A colony of 10,000 brilliant scientists and engineers with no cultural or artistic tradition preserved among them would technically survive, but it raises a genuinely important question about what exactly we would be restarting, and whether pure survival is really the same thing as civilization at all. So where does this leave us? The honest answer, backed by the genetics research, the resource modeling, and the practical skill requirement studies, is that there is no single perfect number, but there is a scientifically grounded range, and it is far larger than almost anyone assumes before they actually look into this seriously. Somewhere in the range of several thousand to several tens of thousands of people, carefully selected across a deliberately broad range of genetic backgrounds and professional disciplines, represents the most defensible answer for a population capable of not just surviving on another planet, but genuinely restarting and sustaining human civilization there across many future generations, with no dependence on Earth ever again. It is a far bigger number than the lone astronaut or small crew that popular fiction usually imagines, and that gap between fiction and the actual math is, honestly, one of the most humbling things about seriously studying this question. If this deep dive into the real science behind restarting civilization on another planet gave you a new way of thinking about space colonization, subscribe to the channel, because we break down exactly this kind of rigorous, research-backed space science every single week. Hit the notification bell so you never miss the next deep dive. Let me know in the comments what number surprised you the most, and I will see you in the next video.